Welcome to Passport Required. I'm Kim Cobert, owner and lead travel designer at Silverleaf Travel.
And I'm Gary Cobert. Together, we are on a mission to help experienced travelers and would-be travelers get even more informed, inspired, and get moving so that they can enjoy great travel experiences and make memories that will last.
We believe that travel offers so many opportunities to improve the quality of our lives. Travel helps us learn more about the world, ourselves, and those closest to us. It keeps us vibrant, fresh, and connected, and travel helps us celebrate life.
We invite you to join the Silverleaf Travel Facebook page so that we can amplify our impact and help people get off of and stay off of what we'd like to call Someday Island.
We know you're going to love this episode, so let's get after it. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is a great episode. I'm very excited about this. Gary and I are interviewing Arigato Travel. They are a new travel partner that I was introduced to through Gary about a month or two ago. And I was just blown away by their services and their attention to detail. And I just think that they had such a great insight about Japan and how popular Japan is becoming that I wanted to do this interview right away. They are a travel partner that travel agents can work with. They're also willing and able to work with other local destination management companies or tour operators who might need some additional services. So I really like how flexible they are, but how in tuned to the local culture and experiences that they can do. I think you're just going to love this episode and you're going to want to go to Japan as much as I do now. Enjoy. Welcome to Passport Required. I'm Kim Covert.
And I'm Gary Covert.
And we have another great episode. Today we are interviewing Lauren Shannon, General Manager and part owner of Arigato. I want to really focus on this episode because it is all about Japan, and Japan is the hot new thing. So we wanted to interview Lauren, who we met recently. A phenomenal company. I just need to tell you all about them. And we want to talk all about Japan.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lauren.
So, Lauren, before we dive into all things Japan, why don't you just tell the audience just a little bit more about yourself and about Arigato Travel?
Sure. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I've lived in Japan for almost 28 years now. And I have a long history, a background in, first I was an educator, and then I went into the hospitality business, and I was working with food and beverage in Japan and met lots of chefs, learned a lot about the food there. And then about 14 years ago, I started working in tourism. And Arigato Travel, when we started 9 years ago, we were called Arigato Japan Food Tours. And all we did was food tours. And I started out first as a consultant because I love helping small business women. And my partner is a woman running the company with her husband, Matt. So it's Anne and Matt. So I met them about 9 years ago. I was consulting. They kept me so busy that they brought me on full time. And then I became a part owner about a year later. And we started out, as I said, doing food tours, but now we are a destination management company. We do travel arranging and planning, B2B, B2C, and we take people all over Japan for cultural and culinary adventures.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I think that there must be something in the air right now because everybody tells me, oh, I'm going to Japan, or because I just came back from Japan in October of this year, and they say, oh, I've always wanted to go, blah, blah, blah. What is it? Why is Japan so popular now?
So I think there's kind of a perfect storm going on. So first, Japan was like the third to last country to reopen after COVID. And so we built up a lot of pent up demand. So if people were thinking about going and they couldn't go for a long time, I think it went up on their list. And then on top of that, I feel like the Olympics did a great job of showcasing Japan, even though people couldn't come. And that made people even a little hungrier. And then these days, of course, if we're all being honest, the yen is weak to the dollar. So especially for Americans, if you've always been thinking about coming to Japan and like, you know, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, it was an expensive proposition to go to Japan. And now actually your money goes quite a long way. And I think Japan itself, in the 3 years we were closed for COVID, there was a big idea that we would take that time and work on infrastructure and marketing and create new inbound experiences so that we would be ready when we reopened. And so I think actually Japan has been really active since the reopening of inviting people here and being very present and advertising in a lot of different ways and working with a lot of different influencers. So I think it's kind of like just a perfect storm of that. It's the time to come here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not expensive to go to Japan, correct? Or be in Japan
I
at the
mean, there
moment.
are things that are quite expensive in Japan, and hotels tend to be a bit pricier than in a lot of other destinations, but your dollar just goes a long way. So
Mhm.
it's as expensive as it was, 8 years ago, except you guys are getting a 40% rebate on the dollar, right? So your money goes a long way. So the hotel prices have actually gone up in Japan, but it's still cheaper than it was 5 years ago because the currency exchange is in your favor.
Yeah, so the currency has gone down. The other thing that you may not feel in the US because you're in Japan is that the inflation is rampant in the US. So we feel it. It's like things have gotten very expensive, 20, 30% higher than they were just a couple of years ago. So when I went to Japan back in October, I felt that double whammy. I felt like that my dollar went very far, and then I thought things were cheaper. It's like, oh,
Exactly.
wow.
We haven't had the same inflation rate. A lot of food and beverage and a lot of activities are less expensive in Japan and would be even if it was a even ratio. You're right about that. The inflation definitely makes a difference. And just generally, a lot of activities and tours have always been, I think, priced a little bit more stably with less jumps in cost. So it's still cheaper to go to the movies in Japan. Disney tickets are still less here than they are in Florida, even if it was 1-to-1 ratio. In Japan, they complain every year that the Disney tickets go up a little bit, but we're now at, I think it's 8,000 yen, so about 75 USD, 70 USD,
Oh, right.
65, right? So that's way cheaper than 150, $200 to go to Walt Disney World, right? So I think there's a lot of things like that that are a contributing factor, but I really do believe that by keeping people at an arm's distance for so long, we built up this incredible demand. So I think everyone wants to come now. I had clients who were waiting for reopening, and one of my guests said the most famous thing to me that I kept with me. She said, I've got one hand on my keyboard and one hand holding my credit card. All you guys do is open the boundaries, open the borders, and I'm there. And
I
and
love
yeah,
that.
it's been full on since we reopened, and it's been great. And it's wonderful to see so many different types of Americans coming. I felt like before COVID, we had a lot of niche travel. There was a lot of there was a lot of interest in Japan, but it was very specific. So people came over for the food or because they liked anime and manga and they were like into geek
Mhm.
culture, because they liked artistry. But now people are willing to come for all different kinds of reasons or a little bit of everything. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. So one of the questions I get is Japan friendly to foreigners? So I'd like your take on that if you would.
I believe it's very friendly to foreigners, especially visiting foreigners. I think, especially visiting foreigners from countries like the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, I feel like that's a really high demand demographic that the Japanese are very excited to meet with. And you're going to hear a lot in the news right now about over tourism, but that's in very specific locations.
Hmm.
And everywhere else, we really are, all the locals that I work with are really keen to have visitors coming. So I feel like as much as everyone was waiting to come here, we were really waiting to reopen. So our anticipation was high as well. So I think generally speaking, it's very friendly for foreigners and for Americans in particular. And the Japanese people are just so polite and the customer service level is really high.
Mhm.
I always laugh that I love maps. I love cartography. But I learned over the years being in Japan that I can't stand still looking at a map for more than 5 minutes because someone will come up and ask me if I'm lost and see if they can help me, even though I've lived here 30 years. Right. So everyone wants to be really helpful. They're super polite. It's not the warmest culture in the world,
Hmm.
but we've really uncracked, kind of cracked open the way to get that warmth out. Because the Japanese can be very warm and engaging, but they're a little bit reserved and maybe a little shy, a little nervous. And so what we love to do is really immersive, like five senses experiences, because a Japanese person's not super comfortable or confident in English making chit chat, but they're very excited to talk about the thing that they are passionate about. So if you create an atmosphere for a visitor where they can talk to an artisan that has made Japanese knives for 50 years, he may not, want to talk about America or the politics or the weather, But you start talking to him about making knives and, all the boundaries drop. And he's just so excited to share his craft with people. And I feel that's where the warmth comes out in these small moments, small community-based immersive moments. That's what we really hope to create. That's what we try to do, is put visitors in a position where they can really connect with local people.
Yeah.
Is
Go
it
ahead.
easy to get around Japan? I mean, for us Americans,
It's
is
very
everything
easy. We
English
probably have,
and the trains?
yeah, so I'm really biased. We have, I would say, the best, bar none, public transportation system in the world. And that's not just in the big cities. You can get just about to any region, you can get by train. Now, if you want to go more rural, once you get to some of the outlying regions, if you really are a hiker or you want to have, experience up in the mountains or a small village, you can also drive. And this is the big myth that I'm hoping to dispel in the next 5 years. It's crazy to me that Americans feel completely confident renting a car and driving around Italy, which I have done and is very stressful.
Me too.
And totally
We'll never do it
afraid,
again.
right? But they're totally afraid to rent a car and drive around Japan, where actually the drivers are not very aggressive. Nowadays, I think it's because of the old feeling of the language barrier, but all of the rental car companies have rental spots near major train stations. So like if you take the train to, say, Shizuoka City, in the middle of Shizuoka, and you want to go to tea farms, the best way to do that is to take the Shinkansen to Shizuoka, and then right outside the station, like less than a half a mile down the road, is a rental car place. And you can bring an international driver's license and you can rent a car and you can drive everywhere around there. And Google Maps speaks English. And yeah, it's
That's
really
amazing.
It's some of the least stressful sort of caravan or self-drive travel that I can imagine. And yet there's been this 50-year push, like stay on the Shinkansen line. So this is why that golden route is over touristed, right? Because everyone goes to Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka because they know that there's public transportation for them. They're afraid to drive, so they don't go far off of that route. But yet you can get so many other places, and you can get pretty far on the train. So you can still use tons of great public transportation. It's not like you have to drive 8 hours to get somewhere, right? You take a 1.5 hour Shinkansen and then you rent a car and you can go anywhere. And downtown in any of the cities, you can get everywhere on the trains and subway. There's no reason to have a car in any of the cities, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's
So very
cool.
easy to get around. Yeah. And really friendly people.
Awesome. Why don't you describe what that golden route is first? That sounds like it's the standard. And then tell us about what you feel are some areas that people really should get on their radar.
Yeah. So I like to tell this story. So a couple of years ago, there was a exhibition of Andy Warhol's visit to Japan and Kyoto in specific, and the art that he was inspired to create after this trip. And so that trip was in 1958, 60 something, right around then. And he had a copy of the itinerary for his trip, like 58 years ago when he came, or 60 years ago when he came. And it's exactly what people are doing now. So he started, he had 2 or 3 days in Tokyo. Then he went to Kyoto and Osaka. He came back up. And the one deviation that he did back then, Atami was the big onsen town. Now it's Hakone. But he went to Atami for a night. He did one unusual thing for the time. There must have been somebody planning his trip that loved Kamakura, because he did a day trip to Kamakura from Tokyo. But everything else was exactly the same thing. And, Japan, I believe the travel professionals in Japan have a large responsibility for this, because the JNTO and a lot of the travel companies have been promoting the Golden Route for 50 years. And so people only know the names of those places. And what I like to do is, all those places are amazing. And I'm not saying that a first-time visitor should not go there. But also in that first-time visit, you don't have to go far, but one step off to the left or the right from that route, and you're going to have a completely much more authentic experience. And the way that I'm trying to get people to change the conversation is on the business side, not on the tourist side, because I don't blame the visitors. They want to go the places that they've heard about, and that's what they've heard about, right? So I stopped asking people, where do you want to go? And now I ask them, what do you want to do? Because if you ask what they want to do, they're going to say tea ceremony. They're going to say see beautiful nature, find out about Japanese pottery, eat great food. And if you give me those parameters, I can recommend anywhere in Japan, right?
That's
You can have
awesome.
much better tea ceremony experience. Like Kyoto is wonderful. It's a great imperial city, but the tea ceremonies there are now so, busy, and they're very used to tourists. They're a little bit jaded about it, but you can have an amazing tea experience in, 800 other places in Japan.
Mm.
And if people just let me know what they want to do, I can create an itinerary around that. So we still recommend, a few of the highlights. You want to have some of those bucket list items. But then for some of the activities that you want to do, there's so much range. And as I said, Kyoto, we love to take people to Shiga, which is the prefecture right next to Kyoto. And it's on Lake Biwa, the largest inbound land lake in Japan. And so it's beautiful in the summer, great nature, but it also has this amazing temple called Midera. And Midera is actually 6 years older than Kyomizu-dera, where everyone goes in Kyoto. So this is a 1,200-year-old temple. And everyone goes to this super crowded temple in Kyoto because they've heard of it. And what's interesting to me is the town of Otsu in Shiga is 15 minutes by train from Kyoto Station to Otsu Station. It takes me longer in Tokyo to go from my house to Shibuya than it takes a guest to go from Tokyo to Shiga. And then when you get into Shiga, you're not with thousands of other tourists.
I love
In
that.
Midera, I've been there 7 or 8 times with guests and a few more times on my own. And I think at Cherry Blossom, it probably gets a little busier. But most of the time when I'm there, I run into about 12 or 13 other people. And most of them are Japanese. So you have this completely Zen experience. Like you think you're going to go to Kyoto and see Kyomizu-dera and have this Zen experience, but you're there with 9,000 other people at that moment, right? And so it's an easy conversation if you break down more about what people want to do instead of just a list of names. Like what I realize is people don't say, I want to go to Shiga because they have no idea where it is.
Yeah,
Never
they didn't have no idea.
They
But
say, I want to go to Japan.
So
Yeah.
I've heard about Kyoto, Osaka. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I try to talk more about what they want to see. And then I always start having the conversations like, what are your must do bucket list destinations? But don't only think of those. And exciting for me after COVID is more and more guests now are saying, we don't want to go where everyone else is going, or we want to try something different. Or so suddenly we have the freedom on the guest side too. Like they're being a little bit more adventurous. They're still saying, I want to go to Kyoto, Tokyo, and Osaka, but they're also saying we want to get a little off the beaten track, which is great.
Yeah.
So if they want to do, say, the Osaka, Kyoto, and Tokyo, how much time do you think they need to be spending in Japan for the first time? Say that it's a first time.
Yeah. So as
traveler.
you're going to get to know me, you'll know I'm highly opinionated. So everyone on your podcast can just disregard my commentary if they want to. But
No,
I
they're
would say
here.
you
They are a
shouldn't
captive
do-
audience. They're here for
Yeah.
you.
I would say you shouldn't do all 3 cities on your first trip. That's my honest opinion.
That's good.
I feel like most Americans come between 10 and 12 days, some only 7, but between 10 and 12 days. If you're here for a 10-day trip, I think you should do 2 of the major cities and somewhere else. So I think you can have 3 destinations, but I think you shouldn't just, if you do the 3 major cities, that's the whole trip. And people underestimate Tokyo. So they come into Tokyo and they say, oh, we'll spend 2 or 3 days in Tokyo and then we'll go to Kyoto. And Tokyo, as Gary knows, is massive. And every neighborhood is different. And there's so many experiences that you can have and so many restaurants that you can visit. And then there's all the area outside around Tokyo, which is really fascinating. And so if you're only you arrive one night, you have 2 full days in Tokyo, and then you're on the Shinkansen to Kyoto, you're not even seeing you can't even say a percent, fraction of a fraction of the city, right? And so I would say leave yourself time. And also Japan is high input. So there's a lot going on. And I think people overcrowd their first trip schedule and it becomes a bit overwhelming. So I would also recommend go less places and make sure you build in a little time, even on a busy day, to sit somewhere and just watch the people, or go to a super local place, or go to a garden and just stroll around, because I think Japan, it's a lot of input. So I think your brain needs time to process all that. It's a very different place. And I think people come unprepared for how unfamiliar everything is. And so the brain just needs time to catch up. So I would say less is more.
I love that.
Which is very Japanese as well. Yes.
It is.
So you mentioned some of the things to do. What are some of the popular things to do? And it sounds like you have opinions. on where people
Yeah.
could do those.
I think almost anything. So Japan is very there's some things that are universal, and then every area is very proud of what is very regional. So
Mm.
I would say work with a great travel professional, find out, what are some great famous things to do in different regions, and try to like do as the locals do. So look for local experiences.
Mm.
I would say that this is the difference. If you can get out of the cities and you're going to be able to experience something that wasn't created just for inbound tourists, right? You're going to be able to do something with. So I love the artisan experiences. We go to this one indigo dyeing studio, and it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Tokyo by car. You can also get there by a combination of like a train and a bus. And we go to this indigo studio. Now, there's lots of indigo dyeing experiences, different places in Japan that are like kind of hybridized for visitors. But this is just this father and son. They're like the son now is the seventh generation. And when I was asking them, when we found them and we loved their experience, they wanted to start sharing what they do with visitors. And I said, how far in advance do we need a book? And they said, well, we're here every day because we run this studio, and indigo dye is alive. It's got like microorganisms and stuff. So they're always checking on the dye and the situation. So they're there every day. So he said, the same morning would be hard, but the day before is fine, which is unheard of, right? In most places, you need a lot of reservations. So I love finding the studios that are just doing their thing, and then they allow time to share that with others. But you're like seeing their everyday experience. And I think can be really meaningful. And of course, they're designing a like small version of that can be done in a short amount of time for a visitor. But everyone does really well at the India, even if they're not interested in textiles. When they go to the one partner will be like, I really want to do that. And the other partner will be like, oh, okay, I'll go along. But it turns out everybody loves it, and they all create something really unique. And there's a high success factor. Everybody usually loves what they made. And so I think things like that are super special. And, balance, it's the same with everything. Balance your meals with like the hottest, cool restaurant that you want to go to, and then the most local salaryman bar where you're sitting on a beer container and drinking with locals, right? Like, I think you want the extremes in Japan, and it's a very extreme culture. Like, you have both sides of everything. People always say to me, oh, Japanese are so technological. And I say, yes, but, they still use fax machines, right? So you can have some of the best technology in the world, but people still send faxes. And that's a good way to understand Japan, is like, you'll always get a bit of both.
That's awesome. So one particular experience I'm interested in, this is just a question from Gary to Lauren, is if I wanted to do sumo, is that something you guys could help with?
Or you want to watch it?
I don't want to do it. No, I don't. I'm going to see it. Let's be specific about the do. Yeah, I just want to get thrown off a sumo.
Yeah. So sumo is super interesting, and it takes a little bit of research and planning. So if you're interested in sumo, the first thing I would say is like start early in your planning, and you have to pick. So sumo operates, there are 6 big sumo tournaments a year, and they alternate. So 3 of them are in Tokyo, and then the in-between ones. So it'll be like the first one is in Tokyo, I think in January. And then in March, they go to somewhere else. And then April, May, they come back to Tokyo. June, July, they go somewhere else. And so they alternate. There's a sumo bout in Osaka, one in Fukuoka, and one in Nagoya. Those are where the 3 outlying ones are. And then there's 3 in Tokyo. So they're basically every other month. And so if you want to see a real match, as well as practicing and things like that, then you need to plan around that time. So you have to know when the stables are operating. But you can also have a really great experience even in the off season. If you come to Tokyo, you can wake up early in the morning and go to a sumo stable and see a full practice, which is amazing. It's a couple hours long. And we work with a couple wonderful sumo bayas, they're called, or stables. Yep. And so as long as you sit there and you follow the rules and you're quiet, you can watch the full session. And if you stay till the end, they'll do photos with you and the wrestlers, and you can ask questions. We always give people a primer about what sumo is about. And then from there, you're in the sumo area. So you can go to the sumo museum in the big stadium. You can go to try chanko nabe, the meal that sumo wrestlers usually eat. And you can just walk around that neighborhood and you'll see sumo wrestlers out in the wild, which is great. it's always fun to see these huge sumo wrestlers in their yukata on a cell phone, going to the convenience store. So you've got this like traditional culture. Dude looks super traditional. He's got the top knot and the yukata on, and he's massive, but he's holding like his iPhone and going in to buy, a bottle of tea in the Lawson, right? So I think, again, like that combination of local and spectacle is really interesting. And so you can do it that way. And then my friends down in Nagoya, around the Nagoya sumo Big Baya, I have a group, a couple of ladies run a company down there, and one of the two partners is super into sumo. So she does a whole day long sumo experience, and she's got some insider access, and you go to see the big tournament, but you also do other stuff around sumo in Nagoya. So I think it depends on what you want to do. And I would just say for sumo, you definitely need some local help, I believe. And I also think that planning is really critical. If that's high on your to-do list, then that one is not, you roll up while you're in town and you say, hey, I want to go watch a match, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You can usually do last minute rehearsal, visit a practice session, but even then it really depends, because they get quite busy. And so you really need to watch your timing. We had people show up who really wanted to go in November, and the November Bosch show, which is the name of the big contests, is in Fukuoka. And basically all of the sumo wrestlers leave Tokyo early in the month in November, and they practice on the Japan seaside. So you can't even see a practice in Tokyo. So basically the sumo wrestlers don't come back to Japan until the end of this coming week. Okay. So we couldn't take anyone to practices all during November because they were in Fukuoka.
That's a really good point, because they would want to practice where they're going to have the tournament.
Yeah.
So Kim, I've got some other kind of more specific questions, but you haven't gone to Japan before. So from this conversation,
Can't wait.
so what? Yeah, and you will be coming up in this next year. So what's kind of on your mind as far as?
Well, one of the questions I get from a lot of my clients is like, what's the best time of year to go? Does it matter? Or what will they see differently throughout the year if they go in spring or summer or fall? Just the seasons of Japan and the different times of year they should go to see anything particular. I mean, like obviously the cherry blossoms are in the spring.
Japan is super, super seasonal. I'm from Pennsylvania, and when I moved to Japan, I was a little confused for the first couple of years because I was living in a rural area of Japan, and all my Japanese friends kept saying, Japan is really, really special because we have all 4 seasons. And I was like, big deal. I live in Pennsylvania. We have all 4 seasons too. But I started to realize that what they weren't expressing, what they were trying to express, was that Japan really celebrates all of the seasons. So there's a lot of anticipation. Most things are only available at a certain time of year. Everybody looks forward to those things. So I would say for people that live in non-humid locations, summer would be really hard. So July and August are extremely hot and humid in Japan. That being said, whenever we have a struggle with a season, I feel like culturally, the Japanese try to make up for it in really fun ways. So like the summer is the time for all the big matsuris and festivals. So there's a ton of amazing cultural festivals in the summer. And that's because we're really hot too. So we want things to divert us, right? There's great ocean you can do it in the summer. There's great ways to beat the heat. You can get out of the city. So I would say summer would probably be the hardest for most travelers, but there's a bunch of amazing things you can do in the summer. So if you decide to come in summer, your kids are off for summer break and you're coming in the summer, it will still be super fun. You're just going to have to make sure you hydrate and you take some time in the AC and, stuff like that, because it is harder. And then I would say, so that I'm giving you kind of the when not to come, I would say that the 2 weeks of the Tokyo cherry blossom season, whenever they fall, which we never know, is overrated. It's beautiful. And the cherry blossoms are beautiful. But over the years, everyone tries to come then. So everything is more crowded. Everything is more expensive. Hotels are 30% more expensive and hard to book. And so, but if you want to see cherry blossoms, just don't aim for that time. Because what a lot of visitors don't know is the cherry blossoms start down in Okinawa at the end of January, beginning of February, and they end in Hokkaido at the end of April, beginning of May. So if you're geographically flexible and timeline flexible, you can see cherry blossoms somewhere in Japan from February to May.
That's
right?
awesome.
So, and any of those other times are not super busy. And so that makes a big difference. Yeah. And so I would say spring is beautiful. My favorite months to travel in Japan are probably May and then the middle of October to the end of November. I think the weather is usually just perfect, and there's lots of good food,
Like
and especially in the
everywhere,
fall.
you know?
Yeah. And I think that we get a lot of blue skies. It's not humid anymore. I think it's just perfect weather. My dream next year or the year after is to work remotely from a caravan and just drive around Japan. That's what I want to do, because in that time, the middle of October to the middle of November, that 4 weeks, I would love to just be on the road.
And does it
Because
make a difference, like northern Japan versus southern Japan? Is the weather drastically
if
different?
you want to see the foliage, if you're chasing like nature, then you need to start. If you're going in October, you need to start in the north, because the leaves don't change until they're starting to change now, end of November, beginning of December, in like Tokyo and Kyoto. So you don't want to go too early. So I would start in the north and work my way south if I were like in that time period. And so I think the 2 next biggest regions in Japan are anywhere in Kyushu, and then working your way up to Tohoku in the north. I think those are untapped, amazing areas with tons of great stuff to do. So yeah, I would say May, October, November, but really anytime is beautiful. June is rainy season. I find June to be gorgeous. It's rainy, but it's not a big like downpour rain. It's like misty rains, and the hydrangeas are in bloom everywhere, and the temples are beautiful. And Tokyo has this like gorgeous look at night when everything's wet and all the lights are reflecting. Like it's just a beautiful time, but it's going to rain on you. So you just prepare for the weather and you're going to have a great time.
Yeah. Awesome. So from a logistics point of view, you mentioned that people are coming to Japan for a variety of reasons. But what do you think about Japan as a place for families, whether multi-generational, several generations coming together? Is there anything that kids would find of interest there? You know,
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that was a big new trend after reopening, was that we saw many more multi-generational families coming. And I think it was like, you didn't get to see your family much during the pandemic. So, and you were waiting for this trip. So everybody just comes together. So we've had aunts and uncles, grandparents, kids, everybody traveling together. So, and the groups tended to be a little bigger. It's starting to even out a little bit more now. Now we're getting more like nuclear family, not necessarily grandma and grandpa. But we still get multi-generational. I'd say there's tons of good stuff to do for kids. The cities are a little more challenging depending. Osaka is great for families. There's lots of good stuff for kids in Osaka. I would say if you want your kids to have a cultural experience and they're a little older, junior high school, then like Kanazawa, Kyoto, all of those areas are quite beautiful and very cultural. And, we've got great amusement parks and great cycling tours. And I would just say, when I get a family that's multi-generational, what I try to encourage them to do is pick some days where everybody does everything together and pick some days where you get split up and come back for a meal together and share what you did. Don't try to assume that someone that's 80 and someone that's 8 has the same interest level. And so someone is always compromising for someone else, right? So you do a few family things that everyone can get their heads around. Do a great food tour as a family, go to a great museum as a family, go out hiking or walking in a beautiful garden as a family, but then also let people explore in smaller factions and then come back together. And a lot of wonderful, like 2 kids, mom and dad families, they even do the like split up 2 and 2 for a day. And then they have dinner together and you get to share different adventures. If your family suffers from fear of missing out, this is a problem, because everyone knows miss what everyone else is doing. And so sometimes people shift, like we'll have a family of like 7 or 8 people and they agree in advance that they're going to do different things. But then one person that was going to go to the museum now thinks that the cycling thing is more fun. And so at the last minute, there's some changing. But I think generally, don't feel like you have to be handcuffed to each other, right? You can travel as a family, have amazing connected experiences, but build in some time for people to do what they like. And if you have smaller kids, a great tip that people don't realize is that, and we know a few, and I'm happy to introduce you guys from Silverleaf to this too. There are some really trustworthy, bonded babysitting services that work in hotels. So if you're staying in a hotel, you can hire a babysitter. So mom and dad can go out for that Michelin star dinner without bringing a 4 and 6-year-old along with them, which is going to be difficult for everybody, right? So, some kids are fine with that, but a lot wouldn't be. So I would say like build in a date night for mom and dad and then use
Mm-hmm.
that service, right?
Is it easier for senior citizens, the
Mm-hmm.
older generation? Is it easy to get around? Is there
I think it's pretty
elevators
easy.
and
Yeah, I mean,
mobility?
it can be challenging. You have to do a little advanced planning. And I'm always because I live in Japan, I'm very critical when I see things that are not so accessibly friendly. But we work with a company, like a guy actually that runs a company called Accessible Japan. And he's
Mm.
a paraplegic in a motorized chair. And he says, of course, he's always pushing for Japan to do better, but it's already better than almost everywhere else. So he
Mhm.
comes from Canada and he said the thoughtfulness, they might not always have the easiest access, but people will always try to
Mm.
make sure that people are comfortable and cared for. And I think that's a big difference. So I think, again, plan wisely. We walk a lot in Japan. So if you're bringing grandma and grandpa, or if you've got seniors traveling, just don't overestimate or overcrowd the schedule because people don't calculate. They look on Google Maps and they're like, oh, it's 20 minutes by train, but it might be like a kilometer walk from your hotel to the train station. And we don't remember to count that, the people who live here, because we just walk everywhere, right? People always tell me they get their steps in. That's how they say it. I got my steps in. There's no problem hitting 10,000, right? So I think there is a lot of walking. So I think you need to take that in mind. Just don't overpack the schedule. Be flexible about what you want to get accomplished in a day. And then I think it's easy.
Mm. I wanted to ask you a little bit about groups. So we were talking about families, but if people that are not familiar, not families, but want to travel together, is that something that you can also arrange? And do you have like a max size? Do you have a minimum
Yeah.
size in terms of groups that you like?
Yeah.
To
So we started working with group travel. And I really love the groups that are like sold as a package, but different people join in who don't necessarily know each other. I think it's really fun to people like that. Our minimum size for any booking is 2, although we're doing more and more with solo travelers if we can add them onto group experiences. And most of the reason why we start at 2 is a lot of our suppliers for those hands-on activities have a minimum of 2 because it's really hard to break even with just one guest. They have trouble making any money. So they usually start with 2. And then our ideal group size is 12 max. We can go to 15, but at 15 and up, you're looking at different transport situations. So if you want to get somewhere where you needed a van, you can no longer take a van. You need a microbus and they're harder to book, or you need a bigger bus and they're harder to book. And so I would say we're really comfortable helping and supporting groups of 2 to 12. And I love group travel. And there's something for everyone. And depending on the group's budget, I would say like 8 years ago or so, there wasn't enough good hotels in the middle range. So there was a lot of cheap business hotels and there was a lot of super expensive luxury hotels. But in the prep to the Olympics and then in the travel boom after, the hotels are opening up all the time. We're amazed in the company. We're always hearing about some new hotel. I didn't realize that Hyatt or Hilton House, Hilton built this new hotel in Shibuya, which is shocking to me. And it's like called Hilton House. And it's these beautiful, like kitchenette suites. You can stay short term, longer term. And it just opened like a couple months ago. So there's still, every time I turn around, there's a new hotel property, either an international or Japanese hotel property, and a lot of small independent boutique hotels. And they're just, the business is thriving.
Oh, that's fantastic. It felt like in this last trip that Tokyo is still growing a lot, and redeveloping. So a lot of things that were there are kind of being redone.
Yep.
So yeah, but still a very vibrant.
Yeah, the hell that is Shibuya Station now, because every time I go down there as a commuter, it's different than as a tourist, right? And they're building the station and it's a 15-year project and they still have like 3 or 4 years left. And the reason it's taking so long is they made a promise in the redevelopment that they would never shut down the station. So they have to schedule everything so that the station is always able to take guests. So it's only closed in the middle of the night, right? And so they're just spreading everything out and they love logistics. So they're planning everything very detailed.
Of course.
But every time I go to Shibuya, there's a new way to get somewhere. Like the path that I usually take is closed and there's some new detour.
You're like,
So
I have to learn
there's
something new.
Yeah, the face of the city is changing dramatically. Gary, you're slightly familiar, the Nihonbashi Bridge, which has been covered by a highway since 1964. There's in 2040, it's going to be completely uncovered.
Really?
They finally committed they've been talking about it forever. And they're showing these gorgeous like artist rendition. They've got the specification and they're starting the development now.
Where's the highway going to go? That's a major highway, elevated highway.
Really good question. A really good question. I have answers for you. I just
they've
know it's
been
going to.
they're going from fax machines to teleportation, so it's going to be a great leap forward.
Exactly. Hovercraft. I don't know.
Great.
Well, I would love to do groups there. I mean,
Yeah.
whether or not they are like-minded folks, like photography or anything like that, or food.
You know, what Japan does really well. So we talked about seasonality. I talked a little bit about regionality. The last thing is specialization. So whatever niche you want to throw at me, we have some really intense, amazing, you know, series of like an itinerary that we can build for photographers, for people into textiles, foodies, for wine drinkers, for sake drinkers, for people that love hiking. Like we go hard on specialization in Japan. So like tell
Love
me
that.
your passion, your ikigai,
Yeah.
and we'll make a trip all around that life's purpose.
I love that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I can see that. And I can see people maybe picking like one or two of those things, you know, in a trip. It's like I'd really like to hike. I would really like to photograph or, you know, like I said, textiles.
And you can go way more niche than that. One of the packages that I'm building now, I did it for clients on request. And then I found out from one of the clients that there's like this whole culture of this, which I guess I should have guessed, but I didn't. So I had 4 gentlemen that wanted an in-depth, high-end watch experience because apparently Japan is very famous both for collectible watches from overseas, but also for handmade Japanese watches. Like these are the types of guys that are guys and women that are buying, you know, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 watches, right?
Yeah.
So they said, what can you do around watches? Because we've heard there's good collectors, but they didn't want to just go shopping, right?
Yeah.
So I found an amazing museum. I found this teeny little shop where all of the watch geeks in Tokyo hang out. But then we drove outside the city to basically the Zurich of Japan. And I know a place where you can build your own handmade mechanical watch. So I took these guys, and one of the guys is from Switzerland. He said basically he lives between Omega and Rolex in Switzerland. And he said he had loved mechanical watches, has a tremendous collection of them, but had never gotten to see it that way. And he built you do the last 65 teeny tiny little pieces with like the microscope. And the guys who lead it have been building watches for Grand Seiko for the one guy's 82 now. And he's doing this in his retirement. He's planning these watch building sessions. So I took these 4 guys up there. It takes 5 hours to build the watch. It was a tremendous experience. And then the main Swiss guy was telling me that there's like watch forum geeks all over the world that read all the magazines. And then after that, I found a hidden bar that's for watch aficionados. And it looks like a sushi counter. So it has the like glass counter in it that you'd put the fish, except it's all famous watches. And so you can go in there and have coffee and just talk about watches.
Oh, wow.
So that's how niche I'm talking. Don't just talk broad brushstrokes. We're building an itinerary for train buff, right? So if somebody loves trains, there's so many things you can do around, not just taking trains, but there's so much stuff you can do around train culture.
Yeah, I've got a friend who wants to go to Japan, and but he's into motorcycles, and I'm sure that's a niche you can dive into deeply, whether the Harley side or the Japanese burners.
Exactly.
On the other side, for sure.
Right around the corner from my house is a place called Speed Star, and they like change motorcycle tires. Basically, they're basically like high end and Harleys, and they have a little cafe. And so every weekend, my whole little block is just filled with Japanese motorcycle geeks, like just waiting for the tires to be changed, chatting and drinking coffee at this cafe.
Fantastic. So I'm sure you guys will take clients that contact you directly, but you also work through travel agencies. So maybe you could...
Yeah, fully half of our business is B2B. We love working with partners. I think that it's great because we can be the Japan experts, but the travel partner that we work with, like Kim, can really know your clients, work with them very personally, hopefully sometimes come with those guests. And I think that's perfect partnership. People that know the clientele and the demographic that's coming and really understand those needs and can communicate that to people like us. And then on our side, we can really be that bridge between you and the local culture. Yeah. About half of our business is with travel partners. And those are everything from like a small agency run by one person to any of the big platforms. And what we found has been our superpower, which is really important, because this is not a superpower for most of the Japanese counterparts to us, is that we are super flexible. So the Japanese are very meticulous. They're amazing, but you would not say that they are flexible. And I don't think I would not offend a Japanese person by saying that. They will tell you, we are not flexible. These are your choices. Pick one of these things and that's it, right? Don't come to me with all these exceptions. And so one of our advantages is that our company is half Japanese and run by foreigners. So flexibility is our like mantra. And that goes all the way to the B2B business. So one of the reasons partners really like working with us is if you already have a certain payment terms plan, we can work within that. We want to work with what makes it easiest for you so that you can concentrate on your client and we can provide great service. We don't want to get caught up in the inflexibility of details, right? So the details are important, but we're willing to meet everybody halfway. And I think that makes us a little enjoyable to work with, where sometimes travel partners from outside Japan try to work with a very traditional Japanese agency and they get really frustrated because the expectation is just really different.
So
neither group is wrong, just culturally different.
Sure. So when somebody, say a group, comes to Japan with you, will they be accompanied by an English-speaking native, like American native-speaking guide, or how does that work?
We have lots of choices. We do groups that have a leader guide with them. And I would say most of our leader guides are long-term resident foreigners. And that has a lot to do with that flexibility issue. But all along the way, our goal is for the guests to have experiences with native local Japanese people. So the foreign leader guide is basically the bridge, not just a translator, but a cultural bridge between the guests and the locals. And then in our company, we work with over 80 freelance guides around the country. And so we can do a full leader guide, or for more independent groups, we can do a handoff. So you'll have one group of guides in Tokyo and we walk you onto the platform, put you on the train. And at the other end of the train, another group of people or one guide picks you up. So you're unaccompanied on the train, but other than that, you have support. So we can do it like that. And that tends to be a little less expensive, because if you're traveling with a leader guide, you have to include all the guide's accommodation and transportation costs. But if you're working with local guides in each city, you have a little bit deeper local expertise, and that person sleeps in their own home. So they tuck you away at the hotel, but you're not paying for their 3 or 4 star hotel stay, right? So we can do it both ways, and both are great. I've been a leader guide a few times now. I work with a company that brings over Australian female travelers in their 50s and 60s. And those are great. It's a group of 12 Aussie and Kiwi ladies that have never met. And they come on this trip across Japan for 13 days. And we always end up having a fabulous time. And I've done that trip 3 times now. It's great.
That sounds fantastic.
And you work with all kinds of budgets, could be 4-star, 5-star.
Yeah, I would say we're not super budget. We're not a super budget group. And so we start high to high. So if I'm honest, I'd say we're more boutique, we're more specialized, and we want to take you to those off the beaten track places. And all of that takes a bit more of everything. And so we're not the cheapest in the book, but we're very proud of the product that we deliver.
Yeah, it's the value.
Absolutely.
I'm all about that. It's the value. It's not the, what deal.
The phrase we use in our family is don't get cheap at the wrong time. So it's really all about value. It's like, how priceless is that to have that deep experience?
And, I work both ways. Like some of my clients really want high-end accommodation, and that's a really big part of their trip. And I myself love a really nice hotel. However, if someone says like, I don't care so much where I sleep, I want that money to go into the experiences, then we can lean in more that way. Absolutely. But you can count on, if you want to stay 4-3, high 3, 4, low 5-star, it's going to be a third of your cost for your trip in Japan. Hotels are expensive. And if you want like a ryokan, everyone wants a ryokan experience, traditional Japanese hotel experience. Those are still priced per person, not per room, because they include really an amazing traditional dining experience at dinner and breakfast. And so they charge by the person. So if you're a family of 4 staying in a traditional Japanese style room with futons and a beautiful like view over the mountains, and you're still paying the full price per person in that room. So accommodation can add up, but I would also say that the accommodation in Japan is quite extraordinary.
Yeah. So Kim, what are some of the final things that you would like, that you're curious about, that you would like to ask?
Well, I mean, I work with many, many different companies and DMCs and, tour operators around the world. And I've really enjoyed talking with you and want to work with you. How do you differentiate yourself from other local companies in Japan?
Yeah, so I think we really are keen on that. I gave you some hints along the way in this conversation. I really care more about what you want to do. I don't need a list of geographical names that you've heard. So I really want to know. So we are able to open those doors during COVID. So we were doing this beforehand. Anne and I've lived here a long time. So I've traveled a lot of Japan, but especially during COVID, we acted as consultants with a lot of small municipalities and prefectures and destinations, helping them be tourism ready and build new product. So we've got deep connections in really interesting areas. And I think that sets us apart. We're not so interested in, we can do a great job on the Golden Route, but so can 100 other companies. But where I would say we're different is that we are really keen to have amazing experiences and not so far off that you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. You can, like I said, just take a step to the right or the left off of that route and you can have an amazing experience. And so I think that's important. And then I would say another thing is for you, Kim, and for your guests will get the benefit of this. I don't believe in, like I don't talk about my partners like you as client. You're my client, you're my partner. And so we're always thinking about how we can deepen relationships, how we can make it a win-win for everyone. And we believe that on the opposite end as well. So we care very much about the restaurants that we work with, the artisans that we work with, and we spend a lot of time maintaining those relationships. And so I feel like guests get the benefit of that because it's not strictly transactional. It really is. We're willing to take time and build relationships. And I think that's the secret sauce in Japan. If you're willing to do that, I think that's very special.
And that's why I like to work with companies like you. I haven't been everywhere in this world. I mean, it's on my list, but not yet. Haven't been everywhere yet. So I, as a travel agent, need to rely on partners like yourself who are experts in the area to help me curate a amazing trip for my clients. So I'm the liaison between you guys, but we're going to work together and get the perfect trip for the client, for the
And what's great about what you do, Kim, is you can really, the questions to ask people because the big difference between just trying to do your trip yourself is you may not know what to ask. And you've worked with enough destinations, enough partners, and enough guests to know how to get past the surface question. And the more that you get to know your guests and share that information with us, the better job we can all do making sure that we match up what will make this particular family or group very happy. And so that's why I'm excited to work with partners. A lot of people are on a drive. They want to do everything directly. I love B2C, but I would never give up our work in B2B. I would never give up my work with partners. I find it super fulfilling.
Oh, it's so valuable. We need you.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for you. Yeah. I mean, I'm waiting for your clients before then, but I'm waiting for you next fall for sure.
I'm promoting the heck out of you. So I could tell it's going to be an amazing experience.
Well, I've learned so much from this conversation with you, and I'm re-energized and excited about going. So maybe just toss it back to you. What concluding thoughts would you like to share with people that are considering going to Japan?
First of all, just come. You're going to love it. Don't overthink it. Do your planning, work with a great partner like Kim, get over here. But, people get a little caught up in the details. So one of the things people have heard, it's a very polite society and they're very worried to offend. And I would say it is a polite society and you can learn a few tips and tricks to move through Japan without upsetting people. But on the other side, the Japanese also know this is not your culture. So they expect us to kind of walk into brick walls sometime, and that's okay. So don't get overly paranoid about it. Like, don't treat it like this, glass ornament on a shelf, right? It's a country that's very vibrant, very active. I would say make sure you include some sort of rural experience in your time in Japan. Do a farm stay. Go to a mountain village that is famous for onsen, but get out of the cities because that's where you see at least for part of your trip, where you see a really different side of Japan. And, those trendsetters that are your clients, if they want to be on trend, I would say keep your eye on Kyushu because I believe that Kagoshima, Kumamoto, Nagasaki, Saga, these are all places 5 years from now, everybody's going to be like, I've been there. But right now, nobody's been there.
Oh, I love that.
I would say, let's go south.
Secret's out.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Well, I don't know if you know Gary's background, but he majored in Japanese in college, and his previous wife is Japanese. His daughter lives in Tokyo, as you know.
Nice. Yeah.
So I would love for Gary to speak some Japanese to prove that.
Yeah.
That I know something. So she will not know what I'm gonna say. So it could be anything.
Say the boxes, where, but
Lauren さん、今日の話とても嬉しかった。すごく詳しいことじゃあ、大変ありがとうございました。心からありがとうございました。
はい。一緒に頑張りましょう。Let's do it. ありがとうございます。
Love it.
It was lovely talking to you both.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
I can't wait to do more together. Reach out anytime. We'd love to meet you and all of your guests in the future here in Japan.
100%. Can't wait. So I hope everybody listening loved this, is inspired to come to Japan. We're going to help you curate the most amazing trip. It's going to be so exciting. I can see how Japan is just going to explode here in the next year or two. It's going to be amazing. I know everybody loves Europe. Europe's become a little overloved in some areas.
The Far East.
Yeah, let's look to the east instead of the west. But this is going to be amazing. And thank you so much for your time. This has been so valuable. I love it.
Thank you, guys. It's great talking to you.
So everybody listening, grab your passport and let's go. Arigato. Thanks for listening to Passport Required. Please be sure and join the Silverleaf Travel Facebook page so that we can connect with you. It is also a great place to share your own travel tips, experiences, and wisdom with the Silverleaf Travel community.
If you got something out of this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe and also give us a rating and review. We always want to get better, and we will read all of your comments and suggestions for topics so that we can make this podcast the best resource possible. My name is Gary Covert.
And I'm Kim Covert. Thanks for listening, and thank you for being a part of the Silverleaf Travel community.